Day and night and day, the living creatures give their praise. To him who lives eternally, they never cease from saying, Holy, holy is Yahweh Almighty, worthy, worthy to receive all glory.
Hello, welcome to this special fall feast edition of 2022 of Walking in the Word. My name is Chelle Wagner, and I'm so glad you came to join me today. And today, what I wanted to share with you was, I'm really concentrating on the aspect of Yahuah Tseva, yahusha coming back in all his glory, coming back, the only one worthy to judge, right? And so the name that I wanted to share with you today, let me share my screen, is Tseva'oth, right? So what does that mean? Captain of the host. So one of my favorite stories of this is in the book of Joshua. It says right here, they had been in the wilderness. The mantle has been passed from Moshe to Joshua, and Yah establishes his authority, making him have the same type of authority that Moshe had enjoyed, right? And had not enjoyed's not a good word for that. I don't think it was very enjoyable. He had a lot to deal with because he had to deal with the people and their attitudes and their bad attitudes and their fighting and fussing and wanting to be, recognized and all the stuff that people do in the flesh. And so he was having to deal with that, right? So anyway, he passed the mantle of knowing that Yah was with him. Okay, that he was the one who had picked this man for this position. And so the people had to have the same respect for Joshua that they had to have for Moshe, right? Hopefully they had more, because they were certainly able to accomplish more in 5 years with going and fighting the giants. And that's what they were doing. So you can imagine, the mantle's been passed, Joshua is now in charge, and he is having to deal with the enemies, and he's fighting giants, right? So we see right here in Joshua chapter 5 that in verse 12, it says, and the manna ceased on the morrow after the day they had eaten of the old grain of the land. Neither had the children of Yashrael manna any more, but they did eat the fruit of the land of Canaan that year. That meant their sustenance was going to have to come from the promised land. And that's exactly what happened. So I love this one. They are getting ready to deal with Jericho, right? So it says in Joshua 5:13 and 14, and it came to pass when Yahusha, which is Joshua, was by Jericho, that he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, there stood a man over against him with his sword drawn in his hand, right? This brings to mind, knowing who this is, the imagery of the only one worthy to judge. When we get into the book of Isaiah at the very end, and Yahusha has come to deal with his enemies, and it says he's trodden the winepress alone. In the book of Revelation, it talks about, the blood up on his garment, right? And so this is who he's seeing. It says, and it came to pass when Yahusha was by Jericho, that he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, there stood a man over against him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Yahusha, who is Joshua, went unto him and said unto him, are you for us, or are you for our adversaries? I mean, he must have been dealing with so many things at that point that he had to sharpen his discernment and figure out who was who. And here's the answer he got. And he said, nay, but as captain, all right, that is Sar, captain of the host, that is Tseva, So as Sar Zava of Yahuah am I now come. And Yahusha fell on his face to the earth and did worship and said unto him, what says Adonai unto his servant? Then he recognized. This is what many scholars describe as a Christophany. You know, had it been an angel, he would not have accepted Joshua's worship, right? He would have said, oh no, don't worship me. I'm a created being just like you. He was obviously dealing with Yahusha as Sar Zava Yahuah. That's who he was dealing with. Okay. So I thought that was very interesting. And then to finish it up in Joshua 5:15, it says, and the captain of Yahuah's host, so the Sar Yahuah Zava, said unto Yahusha, said unto Joshua, loose your shoe from off your foot, for the place whereon you stand is holy. And Yahusha did so. So Joshua took off his sandals, right? So just looking at it here in the pictograph, we've got a shen and a resh for the prince, Sar, right there, right? And then we've got for Zava, we looked at this on the last video. We've got the Zadi, the humble man before the house of the leader. And we're beholding what the leader has to say. And then we've got the yhvh of Yahuah, right? The hand, behold the nailed hand. It's right there. Okay. So the prince is the recognized authority. This is what this Sar is. The recognized authority of the army of Yahuah. The root word for Sar or prince is H8323 in the Strongs in the Brown Driver Briggs. It is Sar with a double resh at the end would be the root. Okay. So it means to be or act as prince, to rule, contend, have power, prevail over, reign, or govern. He is the ultimate ruler. This is what this is trying to say. He rules over or governs everything, to lord it over. He is over everything, right? He is our Sar Shalom. Okay, let me see if I can bring up the next thing that I wanted to share. Okay, so this reminded me of another story, another man who had to fight giants, and this is David. So let's just read through this beautiful story of David and Goliath. It's found in 1 Samuel 17, and we're just going to read through the whole story. Now the Pelishtim gathered together their armies to battle and were gathered together at Sokah, which belongs to Yehudah, and pitched between Sokah and Azekah and Ephek Damim. And Shaul said, and Shaul, this is King Saul, right? And there he's dealing with the Philistines, right? This is who he's dealing with. So, and Shaul and the men of Yasharel, which is all the men of Israel, were gathered together and pitched by the valley of Elah and set the battle in the array against the Pelishtim, the Palestinians, okay? I'm sorry, not the Palestinians. Excuse me. I'm using modern day language. The Philistines. Okay. And the Pelishtim stood on a mountain on one side and Yasharel stood on the mountain on the other side. And there was a valley between them. This is very common topography for the land of Canaan. It is full, the entire thing, that it's a great defensible area of land because it is full of mountains and valleys and places of water and foliage and, you know, plenty. It's a place of plenty, right? But seeing this valleys and mountains is that's the whole terrain looks like that. Okay. And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistine named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits in a span. So right there, we know we're not dealing with an ordinary mankind. He may be part mankind, part human, part Nephilim. Okay. So they were still on the earth. They did not all get destroyed in the flood, or somehow that seed came back. And do I have the answers for all that? Not necessarily, but it is certainly interesting and worth digging into. Okay. Especially since it looks like we're dealing with it again right now on planet Earth. All right. 1 Samuel 17:5. And he had a helmet of brass upon his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass. And he had greaves of brass upon his legs, and a target of brass between his shoulders, and the staff of a spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and one bearing a shield went before him. So it was not just the giant, but also his shield bearer. And he stood and he cried unto the armies of Yasharel and said unto them, why are you come out to set your battle in array? Am I not a Pelishti, and ye servants to Shaul? Choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. And if he be able to fight with me and to kill me, then will we be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then shall ye be our servants and serve us. And the Pelishti said, I defy the armies of Yasharel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. I mean, what was he saying? He's saying, I defy Yahuah, because this is what the rebellious watchers and the Nephilim and their progeny did. They're defying Yah. They hate us because they hate him, and we're his followers. So, when Shaul and all Yasharel heard those words of the Pelishti, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. I mean, they were facing a giant, right? It takes courage to face giants. Now, David was the son of that Ephrathah of Bet Lechem. What does that mean? This is the house of bread, Yahudah. This is where he was from, the house of bread. Who was told, what did Yahusha say when he was here? I am the bread of life. Okay. So David came from that area. All right. Now, David was the son of Ephrathah of Bethlehem, Yehudah, whose name was Yishai, and he had 8 sons. And the man went among them for an old man in the days of Shaul. And the 3 eldest sons of Yishai went and followed Shaul to the battle. And the names of his 3 sons that went to the battle were Eliav, the firstborn, and next to him, Abinadab, and the third, Shammah. So these are the 3 oldest brothers of David, right? And David was the youngest, and the 3 eldest followed Shaul. So they were already part of the army. Okay. But David went and returned from Shaul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. He was a shepherd, right? And the Pelishti, the Philistines, drew near morning and evening and presented himself 40 days. Okay, so this was the giant. This is Goliath. He's the one who's drawing near to them, and he's ranting and railing at them for 40 days straight. Right? This is what's gone on. It's just a bunch of ranting and raving. And Yishai said unto David his son, take now for your brethren an ephah of this parched grain and these 10 loaves, and run to the camp to your brethren, and carry this 10 cheeses unto the captain of their 1,000, and look how your brethren fare, and take their pledge. Now Shaul and they and all the men of Yasharel were in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. So David's father, Jesse, or Yishai is how it's pronounced in the Hebrew, really looked at David as nothing more than an errand boy, to go and do this. Like, he was the least that would have been chosen. Okay. But he was a man of courage, as we're going to see. Okay. But man, he was nothing in man's eyes, nothing but an errand boy, right? Go check on your brothers and get back to me. So David rose up. I'm in 1 Samuel 17:20. And David rose up early in the morning and left the sheep with a keeper, and took and went as Yashi, his dad, had commanded him, and he came to the trench, right? I'm thinking of that trench warfare that we saw in World War I, to where they're hiding down in the ground because they've, built themselves something there, right? That's what comes to mind. Is that correct? I don't know, but that's just kind of what comes to mind with me. Okay, now Shaul and they and all the men of Yasharel were in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistine. And David rose up in the morning and left the sheep of the keeper and took and went as Joshua had commanded him. And he came to the trench as the host was going forth to the fight and shouted for the battle. And for Yasharel and the Philistine had put the battle in array, army against army. So they were at a standoff there, right? And David left his carriage in the hand of the keeper of the carriage and ran into the army and came, and he saluted his brethren, right? So he greeted his brothers and he talked with them. Behold, there came up the champion, the Pelishti of Goth, Goliath by name, out of the armies of the Pelishtim, and spoke according to the same words. And David heard them. Okay. He's listening to this giant, this progeny of the Nephilim, of the watchers, and he's watching that, how he's confronting and disregarding Yah. Okay. All right. And all the men of Yasharel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were sore afraid. So David gets to witness that too. All the warriors are fleeing. And the men of Yasharel said, have you seen this man that is come up? Surely to defy Yasharel is he come up. And it shall be that the man who kills him, the king will enrich him with great riches and will give him his daughter and make his father's house free in Yasharel. So that would have been a really big deal, because when the children of Yasharel lived underneath judges, appointed judges, Yah was their king. But once they wanted to be like other nations, and they appointed men as kings. Well, when men become kings and have monarchs, they enact taxes and they have rights and they take away your freedoms, and you become subservient unto that earthly authority. And it's not what Yah ever wanted for his people, but it's what Yah's people wanted as they lusted after the ways of the other nations, instead of accepting that Yah had a way to do things that would be better for them and to their benefit. Okay, let me see where I was. So there's a promise given. So David hears this too. Okay, wow. Whoever can defeat this giant, there's promises for them. And so David is hearing all this. So in 1 Samuel 17:26, it says, and David spoke to the men that stood by him, saying, what shall be done to the man that kills the Pelishti and takes away the reproach from Yasharel? For who is this uncircumcised Pelishti that he should defy the armies of the living Elohim? That's the part I wanted to get to. David knew that it wasn't just men fighting, but that this was Yah's army. And he had the heart of a warrior. He had the courage that comes from knowing Sar Zabah, right? The captain of the host, knowing that Yah himself was directing the armies and in charge of the battle, right? So I love his courage here. This is why he's described as a man after Yah's own heart. He's always been such an inspiration to me. Okay, let me see. Let me get down here. So in 1 Samuel 17:27, he says, and the people answered him after this manner, saying, so shall it be done to the man that kills him. And Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spoke unto the men. And Eliab's anger was kindled against David. And he said, why came you down hither? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and the wickedness of your heart, for you are come down that you might see the battle. And David said, what have I done now? Is there not a cause? And he turned from him toward another and spoke after the same manner. And the people answered him again after the former manner. They're all just disregarding David, saying, accusing him when he has done absolutely nothing wrong, right? Accusing him of being prideful, accusing him of not being a good shepherd, letting him know that he's, who does he think he is? He needs to just go back to the couple of sheep that he's been entrusted to and stay in the wilderness and get out of the way. That's what they're saying to him, right? And when the words were heard which David spoke, they rehearsed them before Shaul, and he sent for him. So King Saul hears, okay, maybe there's a man with enough courage to go up. So he sends for David, right? And David said to Shaul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Pelishti. So David volunteered to take this giant down, right? He had a courageous heart. I just did a Mercy Poured Forth not long ago about the courageous heart, the Caleb who was wholehearted. He was full of courage. All throughout the book of Joshua, you hear, be strong and courageous. It's Hazak Amatz, be strong and courageous. All right. So in 1 Samuel 17:33, and Shaul said unto David, you are not able to go against this Pelishti to fight with him, for you are but a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. And David said unto Shaul, your servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and he took a lamb out of the flock. And I went after him, and I smote him and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he rose against me, I caught him by his beard and smote him and slew him. Can you imagine? He caught this lion by his mane and slew him. Your servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing as he has defied the armies of the living Elohim. He's like, my God's not made of stone and sticks, right? I don't worship a false Elohim. I don't worship these things that these Philistinians, what they are worshiping. That's not who I am. I know the real Yahuah, the one and only, the creator of all. And my hope and my faith and my courage is in him. And no giant's going to stop me. I love it. Says, David said, moreover, Yahuah that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Shaul said unto David, go, and Yahuah be with you. And Shaul armed David with his armor, and he put a helmet of brass upon his head. Also he armed him with a coat of mail. And David girded his sword upon his army, and he essayed to go, for he had not proved it. And David said unto Shaul, I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them. And David put them off of him. He's like, this is not my protection. It's, they tried to put the protection of man upon him. And he's like, nope, that won't work for me. I'm not doing it. I don't need man's protection. That's what he said. So in 1 Samuel 17:40, and he took his staff in his hand. This is the staff was always your recognition. It's the shepherd's authority. Like think of the Paleo Lamed. It's the shepherd's staff. It represents your authority and who you are. When you think about these staffs from antiquity, they would have been passed down, and they would have had tribal identities of who your lineage was, to show you, who do you belong to? What's your heritage? And so this was David's staff of authority. So he took his staff in his hand, and he chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook, and he put them in a shepherd's bag, which he had, even in a scrip, and his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Pelishti. And the Pelishti came on and drew near unto David. And the man that bore the shield went before him, And when the Pelishti looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth and ruddy and of a fair countenance. And the Pelishti said unto David, am I a dog that you come at me with staves? And the Pelishti cursed David by his Elohim, right? Not by the Elohim, but by the Elohim of the Philistines, right? And the Pelishti said unto David, come to me, and I will give your flesh unto the fowls of the air and to the beasts of the field. Then said David to the Pelishti, you come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a shield, but I come to you in the name of Yahuah Tseva, the Elohai of the armies of Yasharel, whom you have defied. This day will Yahuah deliver you into my hand, and I will smite you and take your head from you, and I will give the carcasses of the host of the Palestine this day unto the fowls of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is an Elohim in Yasharel. And all this assembly shall know that Yahuah saves, not with sword and spear, for the battle is Yahuah's, and he will give you into our hands. And it came to pass when the Pelishti arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hasted and ran toward the army to meet the Pelishti. And David put his hand in his bag and took thence a stone and slang it and smote the Pelishti in his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead and he fell upon his face to the earth. I mean, one shot and it was over. He still had 4 stones left in his bag. And it's very interesting that we find out later in scripture that Goliath had 4 brothers that had to be dealt with. And there were 4 stones left unto the house of Yasharel. Found that very interesting. Okay, so David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and smote the Philistine and slew him, but there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood upon the Philistine and took his sword and drew it out of the sheath thereof and slew him and cut off his head therewith. And when the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. They were terrified. Right? All right. So 1 Samuel 17:52, and the men of Yasharel and of Yehudah. So this is Israel and Yehudah. Very interesting that it's given a delineation, because the kingdom had not split yet. That, it had not split apart until after King Solomon. Okay. But it's interesting that we're starting, because when you look at this, we're seeing that division between the northern camps and the southern was already there. It was already happening. It just hadn't manifested fully yet. Okay. So where was I there? All right. So, okay. And the men of Yasharel and of Yehudah arose and shouted and pursued the Pelishtim until you come to the valley and to the gates of Ekron. And the wounded of the Pelishtim fell down by the way to Shavarim, even unto Gath and unto Ekron. And the children of Yasharel returned from chasing after the Pelishtim, and they spoiled their tents. And David took the head of the Pelishti and brought it to Jerusalem, and he put his armor in his tent. And when Shaul saw David go forth against the Pelishti, he said unto Abner, the captain of the host, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, as your soul lives, O king, I cannot tell. They're like, where did this guy come from? And the king said, inquire you whose son the stripling is. And as David returned from the slaughter of the Pelishti, Abner took him and brought him before Shaul with the head of the Pelishti in his hand. And Shaul said unto him, whose son are you, young man? And David answered, I am the son of your servant Yishai, the Bet Halachmi. All right. Well, I think that's just a wonderful story to understand that as we have to face giants, let's have the courage of David, and let's no giant defy the armies of the living Elohim. Okay. Blessings and shalom. And I hope to see you next time.
Day and night and day, the living creatures give their praise to Him who lives